This year in the garden, I'm doing something that I wouldn't have done in the past, and it might make some permies celebrate, and it might make some permies cringe, because I'm going to take this bale of straw right here, and it's going to get laid down in the garden up there around all the plants. I'm mulching my plants this year. Here's why. This year I'm going to be mulching for a few reasons. One is I would talk to Dan Kittredge of bionutrient.org, a plant nutrition guy, somebody who focuses on soil remineralization. And I talked to him for a podcast that'll probably come out later this month in May, and he was talking about the importance of keeping the soil moist and keeping the soil covered. Well, some of these areas here aren't covered, and it's hard to keep them moist because I'm in a breezy spot of San Diego and we get a lot of sun. This is a straight south-facing slope. So I started to think, for a while I've been wanting to put something down here on the land. One key to making this all work is I made sure to put down my drip line first. I laid down all the drip line yesterday. I used landscape clips to clip it down. The drip line that I'm using is a Netafim Tech line. I like the Netafim versus regular drip tape. It's for sure more expensive, but I think it is for sure more durable. This stuff is thick. You're not going to nick this with a hoe and cut it. You're not going to just nick this with a knife and cut it. It's some thick stuff. It should last season after season. It rolls well because it's a nice solid tubing versus drip line or drip tape, which tends to want to kink. Netafim is down on all the tomatoes themselves, so that's fine. That's on the ground. Next step is to put straw on. Beds like this one here that have cover crop in them, they don't have irrigation in them. I just water them from above, which is providing a bit of a challenge that I'm trying to correct up here. I can't just use overhead rotary sprinklers because I don't want to soak the tops of my tomato plants to try and avoid fungal diseases if I don't have to. So those don't even get drip because removing that drip later on when the chickens come in is going to be a pain. They're watered from the top. Tomatoes have the drip, and the tomatoes and the pathways will be what's getting the straw mulch put on them. Right here you can see one of the reasons why I'm putting this mulch down. This bed is higher than the pathway. So even with the dripper, the water is running down into the pathway versus going down. My hope is by putting some mulch in the pathway and on the beds, while it may bleed into the pathway, it may help build this up eventually over time to flatten it out. So I'm trying to avoid this. It's more extreme on these upper beds where there's a much steeper slope. My goal for maybe next winter is to come back through and try and build these up some more so they're more level. So when I do water, especially if you irrigate with a hose, all the water just flows this way. I want to use the mulch to help slow that down. I realize it's not going to stop the flow, but if it can slow some of that flow down and help flatten this out at the same point in time, then it's worth it for me to do it. One row down, 1.5 to go. What I'm realizing is one bale probably isn't gonna be enough, so I'm not doing the pathways right now. I'm just gonna focus on the rows. The surplus will end up in the pathways, or I'll come back later and do it with the pathways. It's going well, I'm liking it. I'm putting it down pretty thick, thinking it's gonna be here for a while, and I wanna just layer it on heavy to really keep the moisture from the drip line, which is now below it, in the soil, not evaporating up into the sky via the wind and the heat that comes down via the sun. One and a half down, one to go, and this is going to be the worst one. Save the worst for last because this is the one that has really tight offset 10-inch spacings. The plants are the biggest in this row. Note to self, do this immediately after planting next year when the plants are little, and it makes it easy to operate around them. I'm gonna have to try and tuck it in around these plants, which is just gonna take more time. I ended up having enough straw after all. All the beds are now mulched. Now I'm gonna go back and mulch the pathways. One thing I wanna address, because I'm sure this will come up in here, is why straw? Why not plastic? Well, there's a few reasons why I don't want plastic. In order of least important to most important. One, leaching. There's some potential for plastic to leach into the soil. Not my biggest concern, not my biggest worry, but it's possible. Second is it's not really recyclable. You can use some of the better landscape fabric year after year after year, but at the end of the day, you're still throwing it away. But the main reason I don't want to use plastic, and this is like 99% of the reason why, the others are 1% or less. The main reason I don't want to use plastic out here is because I don't like the look of it. I don't want to look at black plastic everywhere out here. It's just not something I want to see. My office is right up there. It looks out the window down here. I don't want to look at these big strips of black all day. It's not something I'm interested in looking at. The other thing that also kind of creates a non-issue for plastic, besides the look, is the fact that I'm using these gopher baskets. So very weird patterns, I have all these different shaped gopher baskets. So to cut a hole for each one of those gopher baskets custom fit into the plastic, it's not really worth it. They stick too far out of the soil, they're too irregularly shaped, they're too ill-spaced to try and work around them. So for me, that doesn't work. If I was just going to plant straight into the ground, plastic would be an option then, because there's really no barriers for the plastic. You can put a hole wherever you want, or you can just plant the tomatoes into the holes already in the plastic. For me, that will not work. So that's one reason I don't go that route. But the main reason is I don't want to look at black plastic. It's ugly to me. But I get why people use it. It solves a problem. Nothing against it, but for me, not what I want to use. So there we are, totally mulched, 100% mulched. All the beds, all the pathways in this lower tier, it's all covered with alfalfa. And honestly, I kind of like the look of it. I like the look of it a lot more than plastic. It's got a organic gardening feel to it. I get some people don't like the look of it. I get why some people don't use it. And I get it can create some issues like slug problems. I'm not so worried about that here. One of the reasons I wanted to cover the soil, in addition to being inspired to do so by Dan Kittredge, was because we don't get a lot of rain. The last rain that we had of any significance might have been in early March. It might have been in late February. I can't even remember. Now it's supposed to rain tonight or tomorrow, which is one reason I wanted to get this down today, but I don't think it's going to be any sort of significant rain, and this mulch will just help keep that rain in the soil a little bit longer. So in our context, my context, I could go 5, 6, 7 months without seeing any precipitation come out of the sky. That's really dry and arid. All the water that I put into the soil via drip line, it's expensive, so I want to keep it there. A lot of areas that I think have issues with mulch is where you're getting a bunch of summer rain and the mulch is rotting, slugs and things like that are coming in and collecting in there. I don't have a slug problem because it's just too darn dry. I'm just trying to maximize the utility of the water that I am using. So the mulch is down, it's looking good. I'm liking it. Took one bale, cost me $15 to do this whole area. Not bad in the grand scheme of things. We'll see how long it lasts. My hope is it'll last the whole season. The next thing to really start thinking about here is, what do I do at the end of the year with all this straw? Well, I'm thinking ahead to that, and the thought is I'll just run the chickens over the beds. They'll help break it down. If there's still a lot left, I'll cover it in a tarp and let the worms break it down, because I'm going no-till here. I can't just till it in. I could try to chop it in with a hoe or something to do that, to integrate it. But that's one thought. And the other thought the other thing I'm thinking may come up is a question here is, why not use something like wood chips? I don't want wood chips. I don't have raised beds here. My beds are flat relative to the pathway. They're not elevated above the pathway. I don't have a ditch that I could put wood chips in. And what I don't want are a bunch of wood chips making it into my growing beds. I want a smooth seed bed there if I have to run a seeder through it. So that's why I didn't even really put that much alfalfa in the beds themselves where the tomatoes aren't going to be, where I can turn them over with other crops. I don't want stuff in there that's going to screw up the seeder. Tomatoes are in the ground for 4, 5, 6 months at a time, so it doesn't matter if stuff's on the ground there. So one reason I don't want wood chips is I don't want them making their way into the bed. Once they're in there, it's going to be tough to get them out. They're not going to break down in the time frame that I want them to, so that's why I went with straw. These are my thoughts. It's working for me. It works for my context. I'll see how it turns out at the end of the day. Thanks for watching. Until next time, be nice, be thankful, and do the work.